Good morning. I'd like to introduce Alok Vasista. He's the parking design team leader from Auckland Transport, here to answer questions relating to 19 Anzac Road, Browns Bay. Good morning. Today we've got our 4 properties presented for disposal. I guess we should just dive straight into 19 Anzac. As you recall, it's an off-street car park released by AT, is not required for future infrastructure purposes. No alternate service uses have been identified, hence it's been recommended for disposal by Panuku. As you may gather, the Hibiscus and Bays Local Board opposed the disposal. We did present to the committee in April. The committee deferred a decision for AT to undertake the parking survey. AT, as you may recall, AT also presented to the 23rd of May Finance and Performance Committee meeting on the rationale behind the release from service. So there has been that answer that has come back to the committee. As you will see in the attachments, the parking survey is included. AT have confirmed their view that it is not required for future infrastructure purposes. Hence, we are here to let the committee consider a recommended disposal. It is not subject to Public Works Act offer-back obligations, so entirely over to the committee as to the future of the property.
Okay. Right, so we'll deal with Browns Bay. We've got Councillor Walker, do you want to re-ask your questions, please?
Yeah, so there's 2 categories of question that I've got. The first goes to the requirement for parking associated with a number of council-owned facilities. Some of them are quite substantial. The leisure centre, the local board offices, the CAB, the Plunket rooms, the library, and they're just some of the council-owned facilities that are centred in Browns Bay on these particular streets. So my question is, what is the parking requirement associated with those facilities?
I don't have a breakdown of every site and its particular requirements under the Legacy District Plan. What we Auckland Transport studied looked at all the public parking supply that was available to the general public, and I'm afraid to answer your question, I don't have a breakdown of actual requirement per site.
Okay, the reason I'm asking this question, it is that public parking that satisfies the requirements of those facilities. The ability of those council facilities and the ability of the community to enjoy them is very much dependent on the parking that's available. And my question that also goes to this is, what are the forecasts for the expansion of those facilities? That is the leisure centre, the Plunket, the CAB, the library, because many of those facilities have expansion plans attached to them that I no doubt surmise will require additional parking.
Letitia.
Through the chair, these facilities have car parking associated with them, which is managed by community facilities, not through AT. So the AT car parking that's provided in Browns Bay is over and above what's already provided for those facilities.
Thank you.
So, has there been any study of the combination of that parking? I mean, and I guess the reason for that is when I visit the library, I observe just anecdotally that library patrons are occupying quite a significant number of spaces. The spaces directly in front of the library, but other spaces as well.
Through the chair, that's a question that we can raise with community facilities. It's not something that's come to us before in relation to this property, so we haven't asked it until now. We've focused on the AT car parks.
Okay, the other question I've got goes to the question that I addressed with the local board, and that's around cycling, around the greenways plan, and around the applicability, which I would suggest has got huge merit, of a cycleway around Browns Bay that would likely go down the streets that the local board has identified to access the substantial reserve at the beach and all of the facilities that are at the beach, and I won't enumerate those. So what study has AT done of the impact of taking out those spaces along those roads, of future parking requirements in Browns Bay?
So through the chair, the parking supply on Butte Road and Anzac, we've got close to 106 parking spaces on Anzac, and approximately 90 on Butte Road. But at this stage, there are no detailed plans for a cycleway, so it is difficult to comprehend how much parking would be lost. And in all sort of, the parking can also coexist with the cycleway if it all depends on the detailed plan. So it's difficult to answer at this stage as how much parking could be lost due to that. But overall, what I'd like to add is that there is a considerable supply in terms of within the study area that we looked at, which is still unrestricted, which means it can be easily prioritized for short stay and address the visitor or short stay parking demand from which in turn supports all the economic activity in the area. So there is considerable parking supply within 500 meters of the whole town centre itself.
So, just homing in on the cycleways,
Yep.
have there been any cross-section plans done for any form of cycleway in those streets and the impact of those streets on parking?
Not that I'm aware of.
So,
So
Can-
Councillor Walker, he's
I-
been quite
I'm-
clear twice. He said there has been nothing done.
I am really
And I know
trying
you're
to
a
get...
supporter of cycleways and public transport.
Well, it's our policy, Mr Chair.
Yes.
I'm just trying to get a handle
Yep.
on whether we can know at this meeting whether or not taking out the parking in those streets is necessitated for a cycleway, and I'm assuming it is. I mean, that's my own guess. It's inevitable that we should have something like that there. And what will the impact of that be on parking? And I'm assuming that it will mean that half of the 90 in Butte and half of the 106 in Anzac will be taken out. That would be my assumption.
Okay, well, actually, thank you, that's your assumption.
Well, but I'm
No, well,
trying to test that with
but
the
they
experts.
haven't done the work, but
Through the chair,
we could go deeper into this and saying if we have got better cycleways and better public transport, we're going to have less people using
So
cars.
one
and don't
last
need as many
one
car
last
parks.
question, Mr Chair, and that just goes to Browns Bay. Given the particular topography of the lower part of Browns Bay, its flatness, the range of things within the catchment that the public visit, would you suggest it's an optimum location for a cycleway?
Again, I mean, I don't have details for cycleway. I cannot really comment on
thank
that.
you, that's the third time you've given the same answer. Anthony, do you want to
Yeah,
say?
through the chair, in 23rd of May, when Auckland Transport presented to the committee, they did give the evaluation criteria and it's policy 2D of their parking strategy, and the consideration they gave when they released this property from service, point E, proximity to arterial roads that support public transport or cycling corridors. It was considered by AT when they released it in 2015, and they presented to the committee this year outlining that rationale.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Have you discussed the potential sale with any of the supermarkets?
Through the chair, yes, we have. In the very first instance, before we had even gone to the Hibiscus and Bays local board, our plan has always been, if the site was to be no longer required for council purposes, to sell it to the adjacent New World. They, at the moment, want to have dedicated customer car parking right outside of their New World. There's a lot of car parking in the area, and when we spoke with Foodstuffs, they expressed concern that at the moment people have to go through, often weave through a wider car park area with trolleys, children, all the rest of it, and they'd like something directly out the front of their store.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing from you is that it's a council-owned car park now, but the likelihood of it remaining a car park is very high because probably you'll sell it to the supermarket.
Through the chair, sorry, yes, that's correct. If I could also note as well that sorry, thank you. Sorry.
Take your time, sorry.
No, sorry, thank you. Yes, we're very keen to see it be retained as a car park. Some of the terms and conditions that the local board chair mentioned, we could potentially explore, but we can't negotiate terms and conditions until we've actually got an approval to dispose of the land. But we can look at those things.
Right, so that kind of answers the whole situation. We can sell it, it still stays as a car park, and they still get what they want, we get what we want, and everyone's happy. Right, gotcha. Thank you.
Councillor Casey.
Just to continue on that line of questioning, the Sunday market, have you raised the issue of the Sunday market with foodstuffs?
Through the chair, again, we don't have approval to negotiate any terms and conditions at this stage.
So you haven't raised it even?
We've discussed it broadly, but we can't have detailed negotiations.
Well, can we, in our deliberations here, in a resolution, put something about, like, to see the continuation of the Sunday? Because it seemed to me that was one of the issues for the local board, was, you know, that it's a kind of custom and practice to have it there. Can we put that up there in some form that
You would
suits
have to move it
everybody?
as an amendment and have a seconder and get it
Okay,
through that
I'll
way.
have a go at that. The other thing I might like to look at is that the other worry of the local board was that the parking wouldn't remain free. And again, we could put that as not as a condition, but as a principle. Oh, principle, yep.
Through the chair, I believe most supermarkets in New Zealand provide free customer car parking. We're not proposing it be sold to a Wilson's or anything like that.
I know, no,
Yeah.
but Foodstuffs decided not to buy it, and somebody else put in a bid. You know, it would give you some guidance.
Hey, you can't do that. Mr. Chairman, can you do that? Can you set, I mean, who's going to
It's
buy
not a
it?
condition, it's just a.
Sorry, I was listening to another conversation.
A
Sorry.
condition of sale can't be put in that way.
No, it's been quite clear what Letitia said. I mean, you cannot, nothing can be negotiated at this stage. So we have a stark recommendation which I've moved and Councillor Simpson has seconded,
Well, I suppose if I
which is A, B, C and D. So if there wants to be an amendment coming up to A, you have to come forward with it. But we have Councillor Lee at the moment.
Thank you. I'll just make a comment before I ask a question, and that is, I note that the local board's views and implications in the Maori impact statement in this report do not actually convey the views of the local board, nor do they convey the views of Maori. They're formulaic and talking about a generic process, but actually don't give us the information that this council has required to be a part of the decision-making process and the reports regarding the progress. So I don't think that's up to scratch. But coming back to the question, this has been going and being discussed and debated for quite some time now. And my question to Pānuku is, would you not agree that the local board, being community-based and democratically elected, would have a degree of expertise regarding the community needs, and particularly the community needs around this car park? Would you not agree that they would have a superior level of knowledge about this?
Through the chair, first point, if I could just direct you, Councillor Lee, to page 18, there's detailed local board views and Māori impact statement there.
In the attachment A.
Yeah, I think the information that you're looking at is in the covering report rather than the property information in attachment A.
Okay, it's attached, it's not in the report. There's a big long spiel in the report, but doesn't convey anything about the views. But let's get back to my question, please.
Through the chair,
Kevin.
Yeah, perhaps I can just answer that one through the chair, because that's more of an overall governance discussion around the organisation and how it works. So that is why we always seek local board input for their superior local knowledge that has then come to this committee on a regional discussion basis to actually include that information when you're actually making the decision around the future of these particular pieces of land.
It's not the first meeting of the council, of this council, indeed the Super City, and I don't think that report is satisfactory. But let's move on. My question is, do you or do you not acknowledge that the local board has a greater knowledge of community needs and expertise in this particular area?
Through the Chair, we are very well aware of the knowledge and expertise that local boards have in their area, which is why we work so closely with them for all properties recommended for disposal. However, we're also very aware of the legislation set out in the Local Government Act and the Local Government Auckland Council Act that only the governing body can make a decision about the acquisition, holding or disposing of property, hence why we've brought this property to this committee.
Thank you. My next question is, given the scheme of the Auckland Council and the 3 pieces of legislation specific to the Auckland Council and the principle of subsidiarity, do you not accept that the local board's democratic wishes should be accepted?
Asked
Through
and
the
answered,
chair.
Madam, Mr.
Acknowledged,
Chairman. Asked and
acknowledged.
answered.
No, obviously
Enough.
not. It doesn't bode well for the Super City, does it, when you get that attitude? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Watson.
I just want to make a few comments, Mr. Chair. if
Okay,
we're
well,
at-
just
we're
see
at that stage.
Councillor Fletcher may have a question.
Yes, I have a question. Assuming that the concerns that are being expressed around the table can be met, I've got a question to Panuku in terms of disposal. The concern that I've got really arises out of the response that you gave to Councillor Simpson, and that is if we determine that land is surplus to our requirement, the assumption that I've always made is that we will derive the very best possible price, so that we will go to the open market, and if we're going to sell it, if we're going to forgo the opportunity of that land in the future, we're going to give ratepayers the comfort of knowing we've got absolute top dollar for what we might sell. So in the scenario that you're describing, you've been approached, and I think it's on page 19, you've been approached by New World or whomever, someone there. You know, I don't take much comfort out of the fact that, yes, it might appease the concerns that you would have with the local board, that it will continue as a car park, but how does it appease the concerns that of those of us who might believe that there might be greater value by putting it on the open market? So can you give me the comfort of knowing that the disposal techniques that are being employed by Panuku are absolutely thorough and robust and deriving best value?
Yes, certainly. Through the Chair, a couple of comments on that. There are occasions, and I think of some of the debate that's going on about social housing and some of our priority locations at the moment, where we do look at getting trade-offs rather than the highest and best value that we possibly could get, and we're always very open and overt when that will occur. Where we enter into negotiations with just a single adjoining landowner, we always undertake a process of market valuation where we would undertake a valuation, they would undertake a valuation. The value that would be looked at isn't just based on what the property is as it stands alone, but what it would be incorporated into the adjoining property, so essentially the marriage value of combining the two properties. If there was a difference in valuation, there would then be a mediation process that would go through, and it's something that we do quite often with some of the small parcels of land that we have, and there's one that I'm actually thinking of at the moment, and it's a shame that Member Parkinson from the Ōrākei local board isn't here at the moment. There was a strip of land, Councillor Simpson may recall it, Naihill Reserve, a very small strip of land, and it had a very low valuation, and through the negotiation techniques that we've had, sale price has been nearly $1 million.
No, I think it was actually double that, but 2.5 million.
2.5 million for something that on the face of it was wasn't worth very much money at all, but we've achieved very, very high return for it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that answer on the marriage. So, Member Tubbery, you have a question?
I could just a question to you, Mr. Chairman. I understand this is just recommendation A we're questioning at the moment, or
sorry, recommendation
So is it just
Yeah.
A that?
We are just doing A.
You said A,
because we
B,
had
C, D
yeah.
and caught me out.
Yeah, sorry, well, I just moved, but
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
probably move A separately, it's just that we have
So
members of
I can
local
ask
board here.
questions on B after this?
Yes,
Matt?
yes. So we have Member Watson.
Oh, thank
Sorry,
you,
Councillor Watson.
Mr Chair. Just a few comments on the report. I mean, I know must be a great temptation for members sitting around the table to think, oh my goodness, here it's back here again. Won't this thing just go away? But I think that would be a mistake. And from my perspective, I think there's a number of crucial points that are made in the report that we should consider in our vote today. The local board, you've heard from them, they're worried about the cumulative effects of accelerated growth, and under the unitary plan there is a lot of growth, intensive growth occurring in Browns Bay right now. So I find it more than just a little bit ironic that the opening remarks prefaced by the statement that there's no future infrastructure requirements from Auckland Transport here, because everything else that's happening on the ground and that's programmed in the future is saying quite the opposite. And in fact, if we look at the report itself, when we talk about, and this is the one done by Auckland Transport, they make the comment, quote, the parking demand for public parking at Browns Bay could be greatly increased, if future developments included a reduced level of off-street parking, which they are permitted to do under the unitary plan. That's what's happening. That's what's happening right now. There is massive, big, high apartment developments either just finishing or just beginning. So there's nothing sure that in the future there's going to be an increase, and all with these maximums. So there's going to be a huge increase in demand for parking around Browns Bay. And with all due respect to a number of the people who have spoken, in terms of Browns Bay, the survey was taken in May and October and the first couple of days of November. Browns Bay's size more or less doubles in the next 5 months over the summer, because people pour into Browns Bay from all the surrounding bays and inland Albany. So if you really wanted to get a snapshot of what Browns Bay is like in terms of parking, go there in the summer months, because it is absolutely heaving. So the dates that were taken, and I understand the officers would have just gone ahead and do that, are not really representative of the huge demand of parking that takes place from the 5 months of the summer, from November right through to March. Neither does it take account of the realities of the topography of Browns Bay. Goodness sake, I heard about cycleways. The 3 main roads that go down to Browns Bay, Carlisle, Browns Bay and Beach Road, you'd need an armoured tank to go down if you had a cycle. People don't cycle down there because it's dangerous. They've got those on-road cycleways. It is dangerous. If you look, there's the biggest secondary school in New Zealand, and I doubt if there's a single child cycles to school at Rangitoto College, because it is so dangerous to be on those steep inclines and narrow passageways, or pathways I should say, with cars. So all that means is it's a suburb in Auckland where there is more demand for travelling to get there. There's a lot of old people, it's very hilly, people are going to go by their cars to get to Browns Bay. Families, older people, that's what happens. So that all goes to the notion that there's going to be more demand in Browns Bay in the future, not less. And if you chuck in the people going to the beach side, then it just starts to go through the roof. So with all due respect to Auckland Transport, it's very hard to mesh that up with the reality of what's happening now, what's going to happen in the future, with the notion that there's somehow no future infrastructure purposes. There has been a comments about the board, the local board. I mean, we had the Aoraki board here very graciously ceding whatever chunk of land it was today. This local board has done so on a number of occasions previously as well, not least of which is up in the other subdivision in Whangaprawa. They virtually gave away for a housing development the only last piece of land on Whangaprawa Peninsula that could serve the purposes of a park and ride. It's now an intensive housing development with a stormwater pond for a playground. They did that. So if they're making a bit of a stand here to do with parking, then I'd be tempted to listen to what they're saying. As far as parking as a whole goes, in the Albany ward, I would suggest it's virtually the worst ward in the whole of Auckland for parking issues. We have the biggest park and ride in New Zealand at Albany, which is very regularly filled up by about 7:15. You can't get in there. Just along the road, there's massive, big overspill parking for the stadium that remains empty, isn't used. So I would suggest that the parking strategies, as we've seen rolled out by Auckland Transport in this area, have not really covered themselves in glory. But I would just say, Mr. Chair, by way of conclusion, that there is going to be a marked demand for parking, off-street parking in Browns Bay from here on in. You're not going to have to wait at all. It started right now. We all know that these disposals, Auckland Transport have said it themselves, they were asked to find parking lots for disposal. They're going to look around and pick whatever seems going to be a goer. There's not necessarily going to reflect the local flavour that we've heard from the local board and from the people that are half familiar with Browns Bay itself. So while I realise to other people it's maybe just another lot for disposal, what I'm suggesting to you is that in terms of the local board, in terms of the local area of Browns Bay, it is the one parking lot that you should be holding on to, because it's going to be needed. And then when we come back in a year or so's time to show that it's needed, then it'll be $3, $4, $5 million, or it just won't happen. We all know that. So I'm going to be listening to the local board, and I'm going to be, more importantly, I'm going to be listening to the people who live in the area who tell me on a regular basis about the absence of parking and the parking shortfall that exists in this area.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Walker, I've been lenient, and John, not a shot at you, but please 5 minutes.
Okay,
I don't want to start counting them, but
I'm assuming the time doesn't start yet. My previous interrelationship was questions, and now I want to speak to this, and I really just want to continue on from Councillor Watson, and I guess my big question is, what are we here for? And without wanting to tell you what it amounts to, is we're here in a governance role, and we're here to join the bits together, to join the dots, and cut through some of the information that we might get from various parts of council, particularly where it's deficient. And in this case, it is deficient. And we have to carry the vision for this council. And if you look at Browns Bay, and you look at the vision into the future, what is that vision? Ideally, it will be an area that has got cycleways going down to the beachfront, so you can enjoy the marvellous reserve there, that has more shared spaces, that is better for pedestrians, but does have adequate parking and parking for disabled people and others, that does take into account the massive intensification that is happening right now and the absence of a requirement for parking associated with that apartment development. And it is apartment development that we're talking about, and the expansion of the businesses within that area and the need for parking associated with them. And when I talk about parking, I'm not simply talking about parking for cars as we know it. Browns Bay is ideally suited to autonomous vehicles. It is incredibly well suited to parking for bikes. I recently visited another city where they had parking requirements, I think, for 14,000 bike shares in their city. Docked. Where are the spaces for them going to be in Browns Bay? Where are the spaces for the electric vehicles? Where are the spaces for the shared electric cars? Where is the planning for those things on the part of Auckland Transport? The short answer is that we don't have the planning, that we've got parts of this council, the planning that's pushing intensification, Auckland Transport, our facilities, the requirements for parking associated with those facilities, And again, that parking is not just cars, it's bikes and e-bikes and autonomous vehicles and all of those things. We've got parts of this council that aren't talking to each other. And I come back to our responsibility. What is that? It's to join the dots, to look into the future and see what the future's like and say, no, maybe you're wrong, we need to plan for that, so we should be saving this area right now because we're going to need it. I can see that. I can see into the future, and I'm sure if you talk to the local board and most of the people in the community, they can see into the future, and they know what that future holds. But are we going to look into that future and see what that future holds and plan for it? Maybe not. Maybe not, and that's my concern. So we'll flog off an area of land for short-term expediency because we don't have the substantiation for it, and we don't have the substantiation, we don't have the reasoning, frankly because we haven't asked for it adequately. So we'll make another mistake. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Right, I have to just ask Councillor Casey, you have moved, do you have a seconder for your motion?
I need to go up for people to see it.
Could you read it?
So you have moved it. It would be added on, supports in principle the continuation of the local market in the car park and that parking on the site remains free at 19 Anzac Road, Browns Bay. Okay, so that will be the amendment. Is there anyone who's willing to second that? Councillor Lee, you'll second that?
Yes. That's bizarre.
Okay, so Councillor Lee, you wish to speak?
Oh, yes, I should concede, Mr. Chairman and members, that I was mistaken about the local board views. They are next door to the report, which I missed, so I will concede that. And actually, even the point of the principle of democracy, we must recognise that the CCOs are in the end answerable to their managers, not the community, and it's up to us as a governing body to exercise the principle of democracy. Thank you.
Right, so we have an amendment there. Does anyone wish to speak to this?
I've got some questions.
Tapa, you want to speak
I
to this?
don't really want to speak to it, I just want to understand it. What's it actually saying?
Councillor Casey, we have member Tapa is just saying
The
wants to
local board made
understand
it
it.
clear that their two issues were the continuation of free parking and the continuation of the market. And we hear staff saying that it's foodstuffs that's likely to buy it, so it's about making it known to them. When I said, can we put this to them, she said no, because we have not reached that, because you haven't made the decision yet. I've got a feeling this decision will go through, even though I'll be voting against it. If it goes through, we have some direction to give them.
So can I ask, is this going to be like, if it passes this point, become part of the substantial?
Yep.
Or
Oh, yeah.
as
That's my
like F
expectation.
or part of
No,
A?
it'll be part of A.
Part of A.
Yep. Councillor Darby.
Councillors, this motion really just, I'm dumbstruck by this motion. I mean, think about this. Are we going to have reports come up here from Auckland Transport? Next thing we're going to have ad hoc motions on the floor here to make the parking in Devonport free, or your place free, or that place free. I haven't seen anything come before us other than a comment from a local board member that it would be nice to have it free. This is just at odds with all the other things that we are doing. Go and look at our transport plans. Go and look at our land use plans. Look at the direction we're trying to take Auckland in, and then overlay it with this, and overlay it 100 times with those motions over all the places of Auckland. You got some pretty bizarre outcomes. Yep. Members, this is just not deserving of our time, and I shall stop speaking now.
Yes, right. Good. So I'm going to put the amendment. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
No.
So the amendment's lost. Right, we are now going back to
By division.
the substantive.
Too late now, it's done.
Right.
Sorry,
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to speak to
Councillor
it.
Darby, Councillor Fletcher.
Because we were asked to go away and find the evidence through this report that's here, attachment B. It's a 40-page review of what was asked for. Now, I would hope that we make our decisions based on real good evidence. And this report says that in the 4 highest occupancy areas, even in those highest occupancy car parks, the occupancy is only at 76% at its peak. Auckland Transport only really respond when it reaches 85% across everything. So it falls well short of demonstrating any need, and I take the local board input, and they're doing their job, but on the evidence, and that's what we need to make our decisions on, there is none that says that there is a shortfall of car parking in the Browns Bay Centre. In fact, the evidence says quite the opposite, that there's actually a very generous provision of car parking. So let's make our decisions on evidence. We asked for this evidence, and now we've got it. We've heard some pretty erroneous arguments that I never heard the last time we discussed this, about a cycle lane going by. In the interim, Mr. Chair, I've just contacted Auckland Transport and the Walking and Cycling Division. It's headed up by Catherine King. There is no plan, none whatsoever, to put, it doesn't feature on the strategic cycling network.
And we've had the
None whatsoever. So just, members, if
3 times.
If you're going to bring an argument here, bring it with evidence. The evidence is in the report.
Doesn't mean that we shouldn't have one.
You've had
Councillor
your
Walker.
speaking turn. And let's keep to plan. And let's think about the bigger picture of Auckland and not unpick it with a decision that is lacking in evidence. Thank you, Chair.
I have Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Simpson, Councillor Cooper.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've followed this now for quite some time, and the concern that I've got is not so much about the parking issue. It's about the fact that, in effect, if this goes through, we are going to be adding to the balance sheet of foodstuffs. What I've heard today is that this is going to become an exceedingly valuable property into the future. I agree with Councillor Watson and others who have spoken that the growth is going to be considerable in that particular area. So without getting into the rights and wrongs on the parking issues and everything else and that has been commissioned and responded very appropriately to by the Auckland Transport officer that is here, I've got a real concern that the way in which that we're going to go about some of the disposal of land that is going to be enormously valuable in the future is actually not a process that I am entirely comfortable with. So I'm going to be opposing this today. I mean, if we know that that land is going to be very valuable in the future, are we doing a disservice to ourselves in actually selling it off with whether it's an implied, whatever kind of caveat that it's going to be for parking for the future? And Letitia's given a very good response in terms of how Panuku can maximise the value, but knowing where that growth is going to come in the future, this will be a really valuable asset that could be realised looking out a year, 2, 3, 4 from now. So the Conservative in me is saying, yes, we do need to be realising those assets that are not going to be required by council at this stage, but not at bargain basement prices. And I think that to give foodstuffs that kind of value on that side with the growth that's going to come is not something I'd sit comfortably with, so I'm going to be opposing it.
Councillor Simpson.
So, geez. So, I thought I was in a good place where we have a car park, a free car park that we own, a report that has happened that says actually we're not short of car parks. Potentially, Panuku are saying if you sell it, it will retain being a car park, so you just won't own it, i.e. the people that probably want to buy it more than ever is the supermarket. So I thought I was in a place for evidence-based on the transport material. Still a car park, potentially. I mean, you know, that's who you're going to go to first, isn't it? You've given us that that reassurance, and we just don't own it, but it's still a car park. So I thought that was in a good place. I suppose the one that I'm just slightly nervous on now is, you know, what long term will this site be? And I suppose the thing that's just knocking me a little bit over the edge is the unitary plan designation. Because the unitary plan designation for the site isn't car parking. So potentially whoever buys it doesn't have to put a car park there.
Of course not.
So, yeah, so I'm now a bit struggling with this one, Mr. Chairman.
We don't need to know that. Just do your vote.
You can't put anything in there. I mean, even if it goes to foodstuffs first, and even if it does remain a car park, when is the best time if you're going to sell it? Forget about the car parking. When is the best time to sell it, and what for?
Land banking springs to mind.
To admit, I'm
Well, anyway,
at a point.
I
I'm not
suppose,
sure.
I mean, I could just comment to say one thing that supermarkets and malls do always treasure is car parking.
Yeah.
And they do not operate anywhere except Metro Marts without car parks, so that is
Right.
the bottom line in suburbia. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to signal that I'll be...
Had my hand up the whole
Yeah,
time.
sorry, you've been bumped in by this machine. Must be Mike. Councillor Cooper and then Councillor Sayers,
Thank
sorry.
you. I'm in agreement with Councillor Darby here. I mean, some of the arguments, especially around there's going to be apartments, so there's going to be a lot more cars. Well, no. When you have more apartments, people walk more because they don't drive from the apartment just down the end of the street to do that. And those people tend to shop more frequently and walk their stuff back home. So that kind of argument is getting more and more spurious as we go along. You know, and it does support, less carbon, which I very much find, I really struggle with these, because it's like, if it's my local area, I don't want it, but I want it for the rest of the region, which really isn't how we should be making regional decisions. So I do support this. Look, no supermarkets make you pay. That would just be shooting themselves in the foot. And it will free up, what that means is that you've got to have car park for that supermarket. And people don't, when people are coming to get their groceries, they do use a car, absolutely. But if they're not coming for groceries, they can use public transport. So this provides more supermarket car parking, which does need a car. So it's the right kind of use. If you're going to have car parking, have it for those big shop days where you've got to carry stuff. Another comment was made about, is this the right time to buy? Well, we are the first people to criticise people who land bank and drive prices up. We hate it as a council. We want people to get on and implement the unitary plan, do what we need to do, and then we're proposing now we do this. Land in Auckland is not going down, not in the foreseeable future, which is a long way out in our planning, our 30-year infrastructure plan. We've just heard that, we're saying bargain basement prices. Where do we get this nonsense? We don't sell anything at bargain basement prices. We get the best price we can. And we just heard that Nihil, we thought it was about $1 million, it was over $2 million. So this group of people drive a very hard bargain. So we can get a damn good price for this, because the people that want it really badly. And that's a perfect opportunity to get the best price. Look, I know car parking is going to be a really difficult thing. We are trying to change the way we do things, our transport, how we get around. It is going to be tough, and people do not like change. But if we just sit there and respond every time and go, no, my community didn't want it, we'll never change anything. We'll be a council that never does anything different. And we've got people around this table who are welcoming a radical new government, but we don't want us to do anything radical. We actually have to be a bit radical here, sadly. And I was at a meeting last week with some of the people that don't want to sell this because they want to keep car parking. It seems to me don't want to change because we might be able to get more car parking. So I'm really, I struggle with this. So I struggle with having to listen to those sort of contradictory arguments. So from my point of view, we've got a plan which we agreed to, which was sale, release land we didn't need because we didn't want to put rates up. And I know that the people on the North Shore are some of the most angry when our rates go up because they're the people that dislike us the most for our rates. We've seen that out on our surveys. So I want to keep those rates down as much as we can. So that's the reason why I support this, and I do agree with the report. What's the point of paying for reports and then every time someone doesn't agree with a report, they say it's not true? Look, we can't keep doing that. We've paid good money for this report and it seems very sensible to me. Got very low, we haven't got 100% occupancy. We've got some slack there, so that's why I support this. Thank you.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we've covered a lot actually in the debate. I don't know if I've got a lot more I can add in terms of fresh thinking, but I do want to thank the officers for their presentation, how you've fielded the questions. It's been very helpful in terms of making up mind the way I want to vote on this. I guess what's going through my mind, Mr. Chair, is the comments from the local board and the ward councillors. And the report's very good and it's been commissioned, it's done its job, but they've also signalled to us about the growth that's coming there. And I have seen the plans of a couple of the developments that are going in there, and I haven't got the exact figures, but it'd be 50 to 60 kind of units coming in there, and I hear what Councillor Cooper's saying about where people might park. I do also notice in those plans there wasn't a large provision for parking for locals. So I'll just signal, Mr. Chair, without going on too much longer, that I'll be probably opposing this. Thank you.
Okay, right. Well, I'm going to close the debate. I'm going to be brief. I just really want to clear up one fallacy that several speakers have brought up, and that's the question of intensification in apartments, that we need to provide public car parking. That is not the case. In the areas of our spatial priorities and where we want to intensify, the areas that Panuku have identified as our transform and unlock areas, we are meant to go up. And you either buy an apartment with no car park, and that's what your call is, or you buy an apartment that has one car park that the developer provides. If you want 2 cars, you go and move into a house a kilometre away. But basically, each of our areas that where we're going to intensify within a kilometre, really the underlying assumption is it's either no car park, therefore you don't have a car, or it's 1 car park and you're a 1-car family or a 1-car dwelling. It's as simple as that. And you then walk around and you use the public transport that we're spending huge amounts of money to put in place in order to move people around in a cheaper, more efficient way and in a far-sighted way like many developed cities around the world. So I just think it's a fallacy when people are talking about we need car parks for these apartments. They're either in the development or they're not. It's as simple as that. We do not need to be providing car parks. This is a similar argument in Takapuna as well. It's a similar argument that's going to come up in a number of areas. But there's a number of town centres where we've moved on. The councillors have moved on and accepted that we're going to go up and you will be using public transport most of the time. And I know some of those that spoke against the selling of this and wanting car parks are big supporters of public transport.
Climate change.
So a little bit of a dilemma. So we've got a motion up there.
By division, please, Mr. Chair.
By division. Okay. And we're going to do A because the local board's here, then we will do the other 3, and Member Pipery will be the first speaker with a question. So we're going to put this by division.
Councillor Clough?
Yes.
Councillor Casey?
No.
Councillor Cashmore?
Yes.
Councillor Collins?
For.
Councillor Cooper?
Or
Councillor Darby?
For.
Councillor Filipaina?
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher?
No.
Councillor Hills?
Yes.
Member Honig?
Aye.
Councillor Hulse?
Aye.
Councillor Lee?
No.
Councillor Quacks?
No.
Councillor Sayers?
No.
Councillor Simpson? Councillor Stewart?
No.
Member Taipari?
For.
Councillor Sir John Walker?
For.
Councillor Wayne Walker?
No.
Councillor Watson.
Against?
Right, that has been carried by 12 votes to 8. Thank you, Auckland Transport, for that. I don't think we need you for the next ones, but thank you for your assistance. Right, we now have the other items, and Member Tapper, you have a question.